My name is Ailey. I am an organiser with the UK Youth Climate Coalition, and I'm going to facilitate today's event. So hopefully nothing goes wrong. And some general housekeeping before we start. Any questions, pop them in the chat. And we're going to gather any questions you have for speakers throughout, and we can ask them at the end. And if not, we're going to send a kind of email follow-up with general resources, and maybe some of the questions that we missed will get answered. So we promise we'll try and answer as many of your questions as possible. If you can remain on mute throughout the call, that would be great. And just to say, we are recording the call, and we will edit out any videos of general participants when we upload it online later, but just so you know, we are recording. So that's the boring stuff. Now on to the fun part. So an overview of tonight, we're going to give each of our speakers they're going to each have 10 minutes to present their different fall solution. And then that will be followed by a Q&A. But before we start talking about all sorts of fall solutions, from fossil gas to incineration to oil palm to nuclear to green aviation, you name it, a quick note on net zero. So you may have noticed that these webinars were themed net zero. And for those who are not familiar with the term, net zero should mean the production of zero carbon emissions from a product or a service. However, it's commonly confused with the term carbon neutral, which actually means that emissions can continue to be produced, but they're often offset or cancelled out, making the overall emissions zero. However, both of these terms, so net zero and carbon neutral, have been taken on by big polluters as catchy buzzwords, and instead it allows them to continue to profit from the climate crisis, whether that's through promoting their own carbon offsets or making misleading emissions comparisons that confuse consumers and governments, and their go-to fallback, a good dose of greenwashing. So all of these tactics will unfortunately be on display at the Net Zero Festival, which is happening tomorrow, or it starts tomorrow. And that's why we wanted to run this webinar series, to really call attention to some of the fall solutions that will be featured at this festival. Now, there are some genuine climate solutions on display at this festival tomorrow, but we do not have time for fall solutions in a climate emergency. So we're trying to educate everyone today so that we can draw attention to this tomorrow. Now, enough from me. Thank you so much for joining us again, and thank you so much to our speakers for being here. And before we hear from each of you individually, I would love to pass to each of you in turn, just to get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to hand over to you one by one to just explain who you are, introduce yourself to the world, and maybe share with us what got you engaged in this work in the first place. And maybe our participants can share what got them involved and what made them join this webinar today as well. So I'll pass over to Marielle to just give us an intro and a wee background.
Thank you so much, Ailey. Good night, everyone. Very briefly, I'm Marielle. I work with Zero Waste Europe and Gaia, a regional European network of groups working for zero waste and against incineration. I'm from Catalonia, but I'm based in Manchester, here in the north of England, in the cold north of England. And what brought me to this work and what kept me going, I think, is a lot of hope. I think it's working for environmental justice gives me hope that there is some justice being done in the planet, and that definitely makes me happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marielle. Naomi.
Thank you. Hi, it's really nice to be here. I'm Naomi. I work with the Gasless Collective. We're a small group that supports the movement against gas in Europe. I got started with campaigning from meeting some really cool feminists on campus and university, and learning with them that campaigning can work, and then kind of followed where I met interesting people and nice groups, and UKYCC formed where I went after that in a huge way. And so it's really nice I was part of UKYCC for a few years, and so it's really, really nice to be back in a UKYCC event.
Thank you, Naomi. I'll pass to Ian.
Oh, hi, I'm Ian Rawls. I'm part of the grassroots Friends of the Earth Nuclear Network. Yeah, been campaigning against nuclear power for far too long now. Used to be pro-nuclear many years ago, but the more I looked into it, certain sums didn't add up. So here I am. It gets involved with other Friends of the Earth campaigning work, but we're sort of, I won't say splinter group, that's a bit over the top, but we're sort of side group and adjunct to Friends of the Earth who attend meetings with government departments and the Office of the Nuclear Regulator and try and decipher their latest thinking, hence the lack of hair. I think I'm tearing your hair out for many years. So yeah, I've been doing it for over 20 years now. So yeah, I'd like to say it's all good, clean fun, but yes.
Thanks, Ian. And your hair looks great.
Oh, thank you.
David, I'll pass to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kreba David. I work with Friends of the Earth Uganda and work on issues of oil and gas mining in the most fragile ecosystem here in Uganda. Uganda is one of the countries that have started kind of exploring and mining oil in the most fragile ecosystem between Congo and Uganda. So I got interested to see how best we can campaign against oil and gas mining, because Uganda is a signatory to UNFCCC, where we're looking at reducing fossil fuels. And now my country is engaged in a lot of mining of oil and gas, given the disastrous effects that come with it, land grabbing, but most of all, forest destruction, and looking at the network of roads and pipelines that will be constructed. Certainly it will take a lot of land, which will affect agriculture. So to us and to me, it's an area that I've worked on for quite some time, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. But it is an area of my interest, being an environmentalist and looking at what is killing this world in this era of climate change. It is the same thing that Uganda is actually promoting. If you're talking about oil and gas mining, when we're talking about reducing fossil fuel burning, then you are taking us in the direction of promoting, increasing or exacerbating climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I can tell you are ready to go on this presentation. Excited to hear more later. And finally, Ali.
Hi everybody, great to see you. My name's Ali. I'm a climate campaigner at Possible, which is a climate action charity in London. And I also do some protest and direct actions with groups including Fossil Free London. I got into climate activism about 10 years ago now, when I realised it was better to actually do some actions and campaigning rather than just worrying about climate change all the time. And yeah, I'm interested in net zero because of the way the whole framing acts as a get out clause to allow fossil fuel companies and airlines to keep polluting with the excuse that at some point they're going to be getting rid of the emissions. And it's really problematic, and it's potentially going to really cause problems with hitting our climate targets.
Thanks, Ali. And thank you, everyone. It's really nice to get to know you a little bit more. So I'm not going to waste any more time because I think everyone's excited to hear from you properly. And great to see so many people calling in from all over the place in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. That's amazing. Let's dive in. Our first speaker this evening will be Marielle, who is not only an inspiring false solution fighter, but she's also a mother. So she may not be able to join us for the Q&A later because she has very important things to do. But please don't be disheartened. Any questions you have, we can try and address later. We can follow up with them in an email, or we can find various ways to get back to you, we promise. But first, get comfortable. I'll pass over to Marielle.
Thank you so much, Ailey. I'm gonna share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Brilliant. So, yes, thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's really amazing to see so many people from all over the world. I'm going to talk about incineration, waste to energy incineration as a full solution to climate change. I've been working with Zero Waste Europe and Gaia for the last 10 years, campaigning on climate and zero waste incineration, supporting members from our network all over the world in fighting this technology. And so in the next 10 minutes, I'll keep it brief. So I've just gone to the really, to the essential arguments. Please send your questions if there's anything that I have missed, or any other comments or questions that you may have. So just briefly to mention about Zero Waste Europe is a network of organizations, individuals, and experts in Europe, supporting local groups and communities in promoting zero waste strategies. We influence the European policies and also support a network of zero waste cities that are moving forward zero waste transition. We are the regional network of Gaia, that is the global network of grassroots groups and NGOs and individuals working for a just zero waste world, where burning and dumping of waste is avoided and replaced with zero waste solutions. So as I was saying, I started working with Gaia 10 years ago, precisely campaigning on climate policy. And so I'm going to give an overview of the situation. So when we look at the connection between waste and climate change, really waste is not the first thing that we think about when we think like what causes climate change. There's fossil fuels, there's transport, there's aviation, there's meat consumption. Obviously, there's all these very important contributions to climate change. And waste doesn't appear to be that big sector. Part of this is because if we look at the methodologies of how the emissions are counted in the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change report, we will see that indeed the contribution from the waste sector doesn't appear to be so big in comparison to other sectors. And this is because these methodologies are only looking at the disposal stage of waste, which definitely are very important sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So we have, in the first place, we have landfills. So landfills emit greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, because of all the organic waste that misplaced goes to landfills and rottens and creates these greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really important source. The other very important source are incinerators themselves. This is a picture of the incinerator in Paris. This is the action we did in the context of the COP15 in Paris in 2015.
Marielle, sorry, just to interrupt. I don't think we can see the slide presentation. I think it's possibly presented onto a different screen.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Okay.
Maybe you can just try again. Sorry, I just saw you mentioning a photo that we couldn't see.
Are you using two screens at all?
Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, if you just move through them, I think it wasn't moving through.
Do you see this?
Nope. No. It's still showing.
Are you using two screens, or are you using one screen?
Wait. Yes, you're right.
If you're using two screens, it will ask you which screen you want to project.
Wait, do you see this? Is it changing now?
No.
It was there for a second, then it went away again. We're still at the first page.
I think it's probably...
If you just where you...
You know what happens? It creates... I'm just going to keep it like this.
Perfect.
You see this, right?
Yeah.
You click through them, yeah.
You know, because, you know, when I press present, it creates another window. And
no worries.
Lost.
Sorry to interrupt. You were at
thank you so much for
the
telling
incinerator.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Okay, so Right, so I'm gonna skip the introductions, but I want to show you this graph. This is what I was talking about the IPCC report. So you see here how in red is the contribution, supposed contribution, what's accounted for the waste sector. This is the greenhouse gas emissions that are accounted in the IPCC report. These emissions only take into account landfill and incinerators. As I was saying, here we have a landfill that emits methane because of the organic waste that is misplaced there. And here we have the incinerator, the one in Paris that I was mentioning. So obviously when the waste is burned, it creates CO2 equivalent and other toxic emissions. And these are the main two sources of greenhouse gas emissions that are taken into account. But then if we think of waste as containing products that have a whole life cycle, products that have been extracted, that have been processed, have been distributed, consumed, and disposed, obviously all these greenhouse gas emissions that are embedded in these products account for a much larger proportion of the anthropogenic emissions that we are giving to the atmosphere. And this report, to illustrate the proportion of that, was mentioning that it was in the US up to 42% of greenhouse gas emissions. So actually, when we think of waste and climate change, if we think of this much bigger picture, we see that we have a much bigger opportunity to reduce emissions in the field of waste than just looking at landfill and incineration. And this is precisely what we talk about in this report that we published in 2015 in the context of the Paris COP, that went a bit more in detail explaining how much of the waste prevention, reuse and recycling are really the options higher up in the waste hierarchy that provide the biggest gains in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions in comparison to landfill and incineration, which are actually options that are net contributors to our carbon budget. Yet, this is the introduction, yet what we see is that waste to energy incineration is definitely promoted as a climate solution, definitely still growing in the UK, very much so, and in many other places around the world. So UK WIN is the UK Without Incineration Network. This is the member of our network that is based here in the UK. And they maintain a map of incinerators in the UK, where you can see all the incinerators that are currently operating and the ones that are planned, the ones that are in the pipeline coming up, which at the moment is sort of up to 50. So there's also a really nice account of all the incinerators that have been prevented thanks to the action of the UK WIN network. So it's not only that these incinerators are very much in the pipeline in the UK, also in the global south, especially the northern European countries really are looking at the markets in the global south to push this technology, but also that we see that they come placed in a situation that clear environmental injustice. So Greenpeace published this report this summer where they expose how the UK incinerators are 3 times as likely to be in deprived areas, revealing how much of this planning system is inherently unjust, classist, and racist. This is not unique to the UK as well. A report from Gaia in the US also identified that the vast majority of the US incinerators are located in the country's most marginalized communities. And again, as I was saying before, if we look at the global south, this is again a similar situation. So you will see that incinerators are definitely impacting the most vulnerable communities that are already facing up to a lot of other challenges. So incineration still is promoted as a climate solution. And the main argument that the industry uses is that there is production of energy. So they say well, we have this waste. We take energy out of it, so that's great. We have to ask really, what's the price of this energy? What's the cost of this energy? In terms of the climate, it cannot be considered that this is a low carbon technology. So the report from UK Wind that I have put here, the link, so I recommend the reading. It's really interesting, very well done report by UK Wind, accounted for that in 2017, the UK's incinerators released a combined total of nearly 11 million tons of CO2. So let's also bear in mind what is burned in the waste. A lot of it is the plastic. So the carbon intensity of the electricity that comes from incineration, because comes actually from fossil sources like plastic, it really is very intense. So if we actually compare it with fossil gas, it's a lot higher. If we compare it with the average carbon intensity of the European electricity grid, is actually a lot higher. So I have put some numbers here to give you like a bit of a bit more specific comparison. But essentially, this is a very carbon intensive source of electricity, very inefficient. And obviously, the key thing is that all these resources that are being burned, they are just disappearing and they're becoming ash and toxic emissions. So a bit more on that. Definitely, it is a really important source of air pollution. So the ash, the fumes that go out of the incinerator contain heavy metals, dioxins, particulates, and greenhouse gases. There is not enough monitoring, not enough enforcement, not enough transparency. There is also a point here, which is that there is the ash that goes and the toxic fumes that go in the air, but there is also the ashes that go from the bottom ash, that are the actual ash that results from the burning. That needs to be landfilled as well. So it does not really get away, it does not avoid the actual landfilling of something, which then becomes very toxic ash, creating the same environmental problems as any other landfilling, like contaminating of the soils, of the rivers, of the waters, subterranean, etc. So especially now in the context of COVID, when we know that air pollution is becoming this driver for really worsened health of people, definitely, incinerators were never the solution, but now even less. So
1 minute warning, Marielle.
Thank you. Very quickly, there's also the systemic point of view. So basically what we see is that most of a massive proportion of what goes into an incinerator is recyclable material. And if we see all these councils in the UK are the ones that have great incinerator rates, they are the ones that have worse recycling rates. Why is that? There is a real trend, a real correlation between more incineration, less recycling. This is because actually the councils tend to, they are engaged, they are locked in contracts for a long time, 30 years or so. These contract mechanisms oblige the council to be feeding the incinerators, in the sense that it's impossible for the council to put this waste away and implement policies for waste prevention, reuse, and recycling. So this is really a lock-in situation that will be a mortgage for the community for the 30 years or so. So finally, just being very brief, incineration is a very carbon-intensive source of energy. It's a source of air pollution and harm. It creates lock-in situations for councils. It's a very expensive source of energy and actual cost of building and maintenance. It worsens completely the environmental injustice in the UK and all over the world. And at the end of the day, ultimately, it exacerbates a linear economy that hides waste. And waste is really the result of an unsustainable model of production and consumption that we actually need to see and face and avoid, not just burn and hide it while polluting everyone and all the planet. So I'll leave it there. Please send your questions and comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marielle. And hear, that's a very needed message, I think. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry it feels so brief, everyone. I'm sure you're bursting with questions, but yeah, please share them in the chat and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. And I'm going to waste no time and head straight over to Naomi from the Gasvis Collective, who shockingly is going to talk to us about gas.
Okay. Is the screen share working?
Yeah.
You can see? Awesome. So, hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for this presentation just now. So I'll talk about what's going on with gas, how the industry sells it, why this is not, why this is false, they're false narratives, a bit about how they do it, the industry's tactics, and how we fight it. So there's a massive boom in gas infrastructure all over the world for the last decade or so, especially the last few years, and planned for the next 10, 20 years. On this map, you can see LNG terminals, which is liquid gas terminals, so a massive port that you can bring gas to on a ship or send it off to a different country, and pipelines. And this is only the ones that are either in construction, proposed, or shelved, so plans that are on the back burner. So it's a huge amount of new infrastructure. And here we can see how gas extraction has been increasing in different regions. The yellow bar is for 1995, orange in the middle for 2005, and red for 2015. And point is, it basically, in most regions, the general trend is it's going up. More and more gas is being extracted from 1995 to 2015. This is a similar kind of graph, but for consumption. I think the striking thing when you look at the difference between these graphs is that the EU, in the EU, extraction is going down. I just jumped back, but consumption is going up. So it's a very NIMBY, not in my backyard approach to gas. They'll save their citizens living near too much extraction, but will fuel it happening elsewhere and increase consumption. So that's the trend. And these are projections from the International Energy Agency, from current policies, and also from the IEA, which is not the most radical organization. It's like an intergovernmental organization. It's also from their sustainable development scenarios. So even in the sustainable development scenarios, gas consumption is projected to increase. So all over the world, we're seeing a global gas boom, and Europe is a really key consumer. So Europe is driving this in a big way, and also lots of finance for gas projects all over the world comes from Europe. This is a map of projects, new gas projects that the EU Commission is giving political support to. So it's a hell of a lot. And some of these are in construction, some are still plans. So what does the industry have to say about this? I'm going to try and play you a video from Shell. It's not very long. Let's see. I'm not sure if the sound will work. Can you hear anything?
No.
Well, everything they're saying, they're just saying what's written. So I think it's okay. Talking about the health benefits of gas to cities and towns. Saying they understand renewables, but that we need gas as a partner to renewables. So that's what Shell has to say about gas. This is an example of an advert. This bus is running on clean natural gas. transport, gas is pushed for transport in a huge way. Naturally, you choose natural gas, and this comes from a massive gas lobby group called Gas Naturally. They want it to look cozy, they want you to associate it with nice things like being at home and drinking tea. This is another gas ad from Gale Gas Limited. It's a gas company, but it's saying, turn to renewable energy. It's completely co-opting. They said they make their money from gas. And I've got this beautiful natural image. This is a relatively recent campaign that I think is just ludicrous. Hashtag cooking with gas from the American Gas Association. And they've got recipes on YouTube all about hashtag cooking with gas to use to harness the positive associations people have with cooking and the new audiences from this to sell gas, make people feel good about it. And this example actually is not, they've taken the video down because I think it's a Shell one, but this was a video in which a lesbian vegan couple who are robotics majors talk about how much they love gas and how great it is to have hybrids. So Shell totally co-opting all these things that they think will make them look modern and progressive and liberal to sell fossil fuels. So the industry's story is that gas is clean, it's green, it's natural. The term natural is completely arbitrary. It's just as the same as saying natural coal, natural oil. So that's in our discourse. You can see a big achievement there of the fossil fuel industry. And they promote it as a lot better than coal, a smart partner to renewables, that renewables can't do it alone. We need to have gas for renewables to work. And also in some regions, gas is sold as a solution for peace. In the Middle East especially, it's sold as what will unite Israel and Egypt and Jordan, and they'll make these deals with gas and then it'll give peace to the whole region. And Europe's at risk from Russia, so for security, we need to build new pipelines to different regions. So it's sold like this politically as well. But in reality, communities and local environments suffer just as it's the same extractive model. I'm not going to go through all of these, but maybe you can share the slideshow later. Horrible local health impacts, land rights violated, displacement, all the horrible impacts of the extractivist industry that you might associate with oil and coal and mineral mining are all the same. And it's the same massive fossil fuel companies. Here you can see these are companies and their investments in gas. All the oil majors, lots of coal majors are seeing gas as their lifeline. They see the pressure that there's a kind of political consensus that oil and coal are bad, and we're not quite there yet with gas. So they're seeing it as their lifeline to hold on to the same model, the same centralized exploitive energy systems. And so the climate impacts of gas are a disaster, but they're a disaster in a different way to oil and coal. And so the industry has their ways of making it look not as bad. So gas is almost entirely methane, which is a very potent, a very strong greenhouse gas with a very intense global warming impact. Methane exists in the atmosphere for about 12 years, and then it degrades into CO2 and something else, maybe water. But so methane becomes CO2 anyway, and in the 12 years in which it exists as methane, has about 86 times as much the global warming impact as CO2. So if you use the same scale to look at the impact of coal with its CO2 emissions as gas with its methane emissions, it's not helpful. And so they need to be looked at in their own different contexts. And what the industry will do, they'll use the 100-year time frame because CO2 lasts in the atmosphere around 100 years. They'll say, look, the impact of coal over 100 years, of burning coal over 100 years is like this for the climate, and the impact of gas over 100 years is like this. But that means that you're measuring the impact of a gas that lasts in the atmosphere for 12 years over 100 years. So you're taking the average of it over 100 years, which means you're factoring 88 years into that average in which it doesn't exist in the atmosphere. So gas is no better than burning oil and coal. It's damaging in a different way.
1 minute warning, Naomi.
So there's many different strategies that the industry use, and I've been over a lot already: creative PR, creative accounting, lobbying, co-opting renewables. And the grassroots movement against gas is growing rapidly, and a lot of this fight is a narrative fight. So we stop calling it natural gas, we call it fossil gas, and lots of peer-to-peer education, workshops, and connecting with other full solutions, understanding more about the real solutions we're fighting for, I think is how we win. And it's awesome to be here on this panel, because I think the more we connect with these different full solutions, the better we can avoid, winning one fight and just having it skip over to another exploitive, extractivist model. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And again, a really great message, and exactly why we wanted to bring all these full solutions together is exactly as you're saying, we don't want to move from one to another bad alternative. Thank you so much. Lots of interest in the chat, so hopefully people can ask you some questions at the end as well. And I will waste no time and pass over to David from Friends of the Earth Uganda, who we're very lucky to have with us today, and is going to tell us about well, more of those good old full solutions. Take it away, David. David, I think you're on mute. I'm just going to unmute you, or try. Can you speak now?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, and thanks to the previous presenters for the good information that they have shared with the world. I'll be talking about campaigning against oil and gas drilling and infrastructure developments in Uganda. And this is in line with the disaster that we are having, that is climate change. So if you are talking about oil and gas mining in Uganda, it brings out a different information about how the nature will be in the near future. If you can go to the next slide, the presentation outline, we're looking at location of the oil region. For most of you who are listening to us, really, I'll be showing where this oil and gas is happening. It is between Congo and Uganda. And brief facts about oil and gas in Uganda, then biodiversity richness, oil issues, economic issues, environmental, and then so far the campaigns that have been conducted, and then we'll go to the conclusions. Next, if you look at the map, can you go to the map? Yes, if you look at the map, you will see that there is Lake Albert that is between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. And this is an area that is highly, very rich in terms of biodiversity. It has a number of species that I'll be explaining as I move down. It has all these water bodies, and it's where oil and gas is going to be mined in this era of climate change. If you look at this now, if you look at, for example, the water body that we are seeing, if you look at the green that is surrounding the water body, and if you look at the oil pads that are going to be established within this ecosystem, but also around the water body, it shows you that now, if we're talking about climate change mitigation issues, then this is a first one, because there is no way you can do a lot of mining around this kind of important ecosystem, and one thinks that there is climate sustainability. Next slide. If you look at Next slide, yes. This is about the facts of oil and gas. This thing, oil and gas was discovered way back in 1925. But the first mining approach was done in 1940 or 50s. But because of World War II, it could not proceed. And it was stopped. And then commercial drilling resumed from around 2000, 2007. And around 35% of the mining area is divided into 10 oil exploration blocks, if you have seen them up in the map. Next. If you look at the oil that is going to be drilled in the most fragile ecosystem, it is around 2 billion barrels out of the 35 tests so far done. The process, once it is done, it will go through the seismic studies, mapping, all those have been done. We are now at production level. And here I wanted also to make mention of the people that are into this oil and gas mining exploration. As you can see from the screen, there is Heritage, Neptune, any French Total, Chinese offshore national oil company. We have civil society and business. But to make emphasis, I wanted to talk about Total. And I had one of my colleagues talking about Shell, because we have had a fight with Shell in Nigeria. So these are the very companies that are causing environmental disaster, human outcry, human rights violations, compromisation of human rights and community benefits from their environment. So those two companies, especially Total now, which we even have a case within court, is the one that is causing all this disaster in the most fragile ecosystem in the Albertine Rift, including the Chinese. Chinese are not only into oil and gas mining, but they have so many infrastructure that are actually they have put their hands on. And I think as Africa, we need to be very careful with Chinese. In the near future, China is likely to take over most of these African countries through giving them loans that seemingly look to be cheap, but in the long run, they turn out to be very expensive. Next slide. This is to highlight the reasons why, when we're talking about climate change and the kind of resources that we're likely to lose due to the activities that are promoted by companies and government, this is in a snapshot of exactly what is going to be lost. If you look at the African mammals, 39%, if you look at African birds, if you look at amphibians, if you look at plants and reptiles, if you look at terrestrial vertebrates, if you look at 60% of Uganda freshwater bodies, lakes and rivers lie in the same region. If you look at those very important national parks, including Queen Elizabeth, Matshon, many of them, they are in the same area where oil and gas is actually being mined. So this shows you the high level of the endemism of these resources, especially in this African and this Albertine graben. So when we're talking about the first solutions, those are one of them. There is no way you can say that you are going to now, for example, mine gas and it now substitute and becomes kind of clean energy. And I had some people calling it natural. Yes, it is natural, but it doesn't come out in natural state. It is pulled out with the anthropocentric activities, which actually destroy the environment and lead to climate change. Next. And one of the issues that actually the mining companies and what we're trying to address are some of the issues, economic issues that have caused a lot of challenges. For example, if we're talking about expectation of oil revenues, oil money never comes into the national basket, especially in the African setting. Money does not really come out clearly where it comes in and what it does. It just, people hear money comes, but it is never understood. When you are talking about the macroeconomic policies, you find people are cultivators, they are cattle keepers. But when oil and gas comes in, the entire string of macroeconomy, it actually dies out. And people now become dependent on oil. And that way, it becomes a very big challenge because a lot of biodiversity is lost, people divert from their macroeconomic activities, and eventually they become, oil dependent. And when oil actually, whether it is when it gets any challenge, the challenge now trickles down to communities that were once dependent. The sharing agreements are never clear. This is taken as classified information, and which oftentimes causes challenges within communities and nationals, because this is the national resource, but it is individualized, and people now kind of own it, and it becomes classified, and it turns out to be a big challenge. When you look at national integration of oil and national development plans, it doesn't add up. First of all, policies don't forthcome clearly. If you look at money coming in, it doesn't actually support national plans, and that becomes a challenge. And if you look at policies and frameworks that manage all revenue, they are only centered to individuals who make decisions on behalf of the people. For example, in Uganda here, it is the minister who makes the decision on whether or not oil should be mined in whatever area, who should do what. So eventually you find that now oil and gas is under a small group of people actually nominated by the ruling class that eventually ends up being untouched, having a lot of money, suppressing each and every person, and it turns out to be a disaster in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of violating people's rights, in terms of changing the climate. Next.
Just a 2-minute warning, David.
2-minute warning, David. Sorry?
You got 2 minutes left.
Sorry? You got 2 minutes left. 2 minutes left. Oh, sorry. Then I think I need again to leave out the resources. I need to let's go to the campaigns that we have been doing. Can we go to the third slide? We look at the campaigns conducted. We have been conducting campaigns against land grabbing, campaigns against destruction of biodiversity, because there will be construction of this pipeline from Uganda up to Tanga, and to us that is really a false approach. If you look at mining in a national park, it is never something that is never called for, and we have been also working on women empowerment. We believe women in the center can actually make things happen, and if you have had and if you have seen on social media, there is that natural forest called Bugoma that is being destroyed as a way of giving way for growing of sugarcane, but to us that is a disaster. And I wanted also to talk about the net zero. Net zero cannot be achieved unless oil and gas mining really is not done, unless mining not only of oil but of other resources is not done, because net zero can never be achieved when the resources, when in the process there is a lot of activities that destroy environment and a lot of carbon dioxide is released into the environment. The northern countries continue to pollute, thinking that there is some other sink in Africa where their carbon dioxide and other emissions will be captured, and emissions are dealt with from the source, not where they go. So I think it is, many people portray that it is a positive signal in the world and it will avoid climate breakdown, which is not true. And one of other corporate capture approaches that we have been doing, like RED+. RED+ is the first solution to climate change. If you are talking about fine and people pay, that is a first solution to climate change. So similar campaigns have been conducted in Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, but also in Uganda, like I have mentioned. Can go to the next slide. In conclusion, oil and gas can be disastrous to the environment to the extent that in the both long and short run, it destroys the environment. Net zero cannot be achieved in the second half like it is put at global. Achieving net zero emissions, it means balancing human activities and the removal of greenhouse gases. But now we continue to emit a lot in the process of oil and gas exploration. So net zero can never be achieved, and this is the first solution to climate change. And something else that we need to talk about is the claims that hide inequalities and injustices. Corporations in the north plan to continue to burn fossil fuels while assuming that someone else in the south will actually soak the carbon dioxide and other emissions. This is not true. We need to keep forests and lands. Emissions are reduced from the source of production. Very important. Next. in conclusion, reducing emissions to zero it has to be done as quickly as possible. We need to phase out coal. We need to shift to electric vehicles and ensure that wetlands and forests are protected, but also reduce food loss and avoid conspicuous consumption. That is also some other big thing that needs to be dealt with. And as much as we possibly can, sequester carbon from the environment and reduce the carbon footprint. Some of the few recommendations that we are making is that reduce emissions from the source of generation. I repeat that one. And we must stop oil and gas drilling, and if net zero is to be achieved. And corruption among East African leaders must stop. Conspicuous consumption must stop. Save energy and invest in clean energy technologies. I thank you very much, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm so sorry we had to rush you. That was really interesting to hear everything and all the connections and the social issues and definitely this global north, global south challenge. I think that was really great that you drew that out there. So thank you. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to go straight over to Ian from Friends of the Earth Anti-Nuclear Network. Take it away, Ian. Hold on, you're on mute. Now you're good.
That one, show me screen. We do it. Right, oh dear, hang on. I really want from the beginning. Right, sorry, here we go. As you can tell, my tech skills are not much. I'm going to be reading from a script as well, so if it sounds a bit stilted, apologise for that. Thank you for all the previous presentations, all fantastic. Thank you. Anyway, to combat the threat of climate change, we obviously need to secure clean, safe, affordable, sustainable, low-carbon electricity. We can achieve this through a set of technically and economically viable renewable options, and also some argue nuclear power. However, the nuclear industry is in trouble. Its share of electricity generation is declining, along with investment as costs mount. Investment in renewable soars, and the unsolved problem of what to do with the waste increasingly make nuclear power look like yesterday's solution to today's problem. I've got some graphs here of the decline in nuclear power. I'm going to whiz through them, but they will be available later. But we can see at the end of the graphs, basically nuclear is on a downward slope. And these are as well, some of these graphs are about 6 years old, so the current state of play is probably worse for nuclear. So you can just see at the end, little dip. And then we've got the latest, which is Hitachi pulling out of the of another nuclear deal. Of the 6 designated sites for a UK nuclear plant, 3 have been abandoned, 2 are in doubt, and only Hinkley Point C is under construction, albeit subject to escalating costs, time slippage, and security concerns about Chinese involvement. Standard & Poor, the global credit rating agency, sees little economic rationale for a new nuclear build in the US or Western Europe, owing to massive cost escalations and renewables cost competitiveness, which would lead to a material decline in nuclear generation in those countries by 2040. The National Audit Office has also said that the economic case for new nuclear at Hinkley Point C was both very risky and expensive for the UK taxpayer and energy consumer. Meanwhile, the National Infrastructure Mission reported that new renewable energy represented the least cost for customers. We need to be carbon neutral as soon as possible. So it's worrying that EDF admits that it will take 20 years after Sizewell C starts construction, if it ever does, to pay off its own carbon bill. Not only that, but the UK Institute of Mechanical Engineers has voiced concerns that projected sea level rise could significantly redraw the map of the UK, as well as power station sites such as Sizewell. Let's also not forget, and this is the big killer for nuclear as far as I'm concerned, electricity generation accounts for 30% of the UK's emissions. Nuclear power generates at most 20% of the UK's electricity. So nuclear power in the UK cuts our CO2 emissions by 6%, at 30%, 20% as it were. And that assumes nuclear power doesn't have a CO2 footprint, which it does. As I've listed here, you've got to mine the uranium, you've got to enrich it, you've got to build a nuclear power plant, deal with the waste. And they've got a bit there about CO2 equivalent emissions from the water vapor and heat they release, which I can go into more detail on later in the questions. So what's the nuclear industry going to do about all this? I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Push small modular reactors for all they're worth. This is a sort of last chance saloon for nuclear power. The thought that if you make them smaller, make them out of standardized components, you can build them in factories and transport them easily to your location. They'll have reduced cooling costs, cooling requirements, be easier to refuel. You can locate them close to cities, so you'll cut down energy losses and the like. You often see these two diagrams whenever someone talks about modular reactors, are sort of artist's impressions, which have been doing the rounds for years. The one at the bottom there, sort of the big wood louse, that's the Rolls-Royce design. And this is the one about the standardized components being wheeled in on the back of a truck. Yeah, I've got some theoretical advantages here: lower absolute capital costs, reduced construction risk, shorter construction times, reduced investment in the transmission network, etc., etc. They'll enable you to throw your voice and see through walls. I'm a bit cynical about this because this has been going on for years and years. People have been making these claims. However, the disadvantages, however small a nuclear reactor is, it still needs control systems. You still need people to look after it. You still need waste disposal facilities, etc. They're fixed costs. So the nuclear industry has tended to make nuclear power stations as big as possible to make the most amount of electricity for these fixed costs. Making them smaller reduces the amount of electricity you can produce and therefore decreases their profitability. So the economic case of them becomes even more shaky. But perhaps the biggest disadvantage of these reactors is none of them exist. They're all theoretical, they're all proposed, they're all, at best, they exist as prototypes, and I don't think any of them even do. The earliest any of them are going to come online, even as prototypes, is 2030. And all the while renewables are advancing in real life and providing ever cheaper electricity. And yet SMRs are still touted as a solution to climate change. I mean, this disconnect has always existed. I've got a hero of mine, and a very unlikely hero, is Admiral. These are some of the proposed designs. I mean, like I say, the slides will be available afterwards. I can explain what these are, but we haven't got several weeks to go into all the various ins and outs of them. These ones are the real fantasy land, the sodium-cooled fast reactors and the molten salt reactors and so on and so forth. But all this sort of fantasy and dreaming has been going on for years. This is a hero of mine. This is Admiral Hyam G. Rickover, the father of the US nuclear navy. He was used to dealing with people throwing new and unproven nuclear reactor designs at him. So he's a bit of a hero of mine because in 1953 he came out with a paper sort of bemoaning his lot in life and how fed up he was with all this. He quoted about the academic reactor, which is basically what SMRs are at the moment. And he stated, an academic reactor or reactor plant almost has the following basic characteristics. It's simple, it's small, it's cheap, it's light, it can be built very quickly, it's very flexible in purpose, very little development will be required. We'll use off-the-shelf components. The reactor is in the study phase. It is not being built now. Exactly like today's SMRs, and that was nearly 70 years ago. And he goes on. On the other hand, a practical reactor can be distinguished by the following characteristics. It's being built now, it's behind schedule, it requires an immense amount of development on apparently trivial items, it's very expensive, takes a long time to build because of engineering development problems, it's large, it's heavy, and it's complicated. Exactly the same issues nuclear power has today. Nothing has changed. Thank you, Admiral. Anyway, none of them will be ready in time to help in the fight against climate change. Notice how the descriptions put by the proponents are always in the future tense. We'll have will be, going to be, possibly will, potentially, and supported by glossy artist impressions, the two of which I've just shown you, which pop up with alarming frequency. I've circulated some papers which should be available later on SMR reactors, and the pebble bed reactor in particular, which was a great hope. The South Africans thought about giving it a go, and I think the Atomic Energy Authority then went through all the possible design problems with it, and it makes horrendous reading. What sounds like a simple idea has an unbelievable number of issues if you actually know what you're talking about and get into the detail, and many of these other developments are just like that. And yet, our government, bless them, have bought into the myth. They've been lobbied to death by the nuclear industry. In December 2014, an Energy and Climate Change Committee, or the Energy and Climate Change Committee, report found that SMRs are a potentially complementary technology to the current nuclear new build program and could offer significant skills, supply chain, and trade and export opportunities. Notice nothing about climate change in there. And according to the National Nuclear Laboratory, the global market in SMRs could be worth 250 to 400 billion in 2035, provided the technology proves competitive. And there you go, provided it proves competitive. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they are the National Nuclear Laboratory. It's what they do. Abundant evidence shows that renewable energy supply, storage, distribution, and management technologies are being developed ever cheaper and more cheaply and swiftly at a time when real urgency is required of society and government. Nuclear power in general, and SMRs in particular, are no answer to creating low carbon economies by 2030 or even close to that date, if ever. So, I mean, why is the government continuing down the path? Well, I personally think there are two main reasons. Renewable energy is a dispersed source of energy. Solar and wind farms occupy large areas. You can use the land on which they're based for other things. You can grow crops around wind turbines, solar farms, whatever. You can. I've seen pigs being used, well, being housed in fields under solar panels because they, like us, get sunburned, so they can use the solar panels for sunshade, etc., etc. You can use the land for other things, but they occupy large areas of land and they're highly visible. So there's loads of local opposition to them often, to their construction. They're often built in rural areas where people have not had to previously deal with the consequences of their energy use. They're used to a certain view, and something moves in, they don't like it. Round here, round Cambridge where I live, we're a little red island in a sea of Tory rural blue, and if a government supports renewable energy, building of wind farms, whatever, they're going to lose votes in that area, and that's a key point for them to worry about. Nuclear power plants, however, occupy smaller areas, so any opposition is intrinsically local and limited. And what's more, a lot of the population around the nuclear power plant have employment there, so they're obviously in support. So if you like, the opposition is a lot more concentrated and smaller in numbers. And I think that has a big influence on the government. You know, you're losing votes in marginal seats and whatever. You know, so, but I think the main thing is to maintain the nuclear weapons capability. People can argue the ins and outs of whether civilian nuclear leads to nuclear weapons, but you tend to need one in order to have the other. They provide not only the materials, but the skills and the infrastructure for constructing nuclear weapons. And Britain wants to maintain its nuclear capacity for whatever reason. Therefore, it has to have skilled people who can deal with nuclear energy and all the infrastructure in order to develop their nuclear weapons. The nuclear industry know this, and if you like, I mean, it sounds paranoid, it sounds like we should all have tinfoil hats on, but the nuclear industry has embedded itself in government. They do things like offer interns to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who will help formulate government policy and things. I mean, if you don't believe this, Caroline Lucas did a report a few years ago called The Corruption of Governance, which showed just how far the nuclear industry had embedded itself in government. And I think I've included a copy of that in the set of PDFs I sent, so hopefully you should be able to access those afterwards, I think.
Just 1 minute left, Ian.
Okay, well, that's great, because I've nearly finished. And just in case anyone's going to mention intermittency in renewables, there's a link here at the bottom, which should be available on the slides later. Which sort of debunks the myth of the intermittency of renewables, meaning they'll never replace fossil fuels or nuclear power. And I think I've also included a copy of it as well. So loads of background reading when you've got a spare week or so to sit down and do nothing else. Okay, me done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was great. Don't forget to stop sharing your screen now. Thank you so much, and good job on the tech. I'll pass straight over to Ali. We're running a wee bit late, but that's no problem. Keep sending in your questions. We are taking note, I promise. Okay, so our final false solution of the evening, although not the final false solution out there, I promise, is all about the myth of green aviation. I'll pass over to Ali now.
Hi, thanks so much, and thanks so much to all the other speakers as well for your presentations. That was all really interesting. Can people see my screen okay?
Not yet.
All right. Is that working?
Yep. Perfect.
Fantastic. So I'm going to talk a bit about Heathrow and the issues with its claims to be climate friendly. And then I'm going to cover some of the wide spectrum of false solutions that the aviation industry is pushing as a way to keep on flying. And most of these solutions either don't work or don't exist. And finally, I'm going to talk briefly about demand reduction, which is a solution that would actually work. So this is Heathrow's breakdown of its carbon emissions. As you can see, Heathrow is an airport. Its main business is getting planes into the air. So they've been very loud about their efforts to cut emissions from Heathrow's ground-based operations. But as you can see, that makes up just 5% of emissions from the airport. 95% of their emissions come, as you would expect, from airplanes, which are spewing out carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And Heathrow likes to talk about becoming a zero carbon airport with measures like improving its energy efficiency, using renewable energy. But this narrative from the airport really is at best misleading. It gives consumers a completely inaccurate impression about the environmental harm that's caused by flying. You know, they're very loud about their efforts to cut the 5% of their emissions that comes from their ground operations, but at the same time, they are actively pursuing policies which would make the 95% of their emissions from flying even bigger. And let's not forget that at the moment, while Heathrow is speaking at the Net Zero Festival and they're trying to position themselves as a company that's really engaged on climate change, they are also taking legal action to challenge the Court of Appeal judgment that the third runway was unlawful on the grounds of its climate impacts. So that's very clearly not the action of a company which is willing to put the planet above its profits. Heathrow is already the UK's largest single source of emissions. Their plans for the third runway would add around another 9 million tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions per year. And that in itself would take up around 1/10 of our carbon budget in 2050. So the narrative that Heathrow is pushing also contributes to the wider problem of greenwashing around aviation emissions. So this shows the Committee on Climate Change, which is the UK's official advisors on climate. This is their projections about what the UK is going to be emitting in 2050. And as you can see, flying, which is the purple box on the left-hand side, is going to take up about 1/3 of the UK's carbon emissions by then. But even that relies on a huge chunk. So to balance it out and get to net zero, that relies on a huge chunk of carbon dioxide removals. So allowing aviation to continue only works if we can remove millions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year. Right now we can't, nobody's ever done this. There's huge issues with any of the technologies which are proposed as a way to do this. The aviation industry likes to throw around the figure that it only produces 2% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. But in the UK, because people here fly a lot, it's more like 10%. And there's also the issue that as well as carbon dioxide, planes also produce other greenhouse gases. And that means that their total warming impact on the climate is about twice the size, at least, of their emissions from carbon dioxide alone. So emissions from flying are really not an insignificant problem. There's also the issue that aviation is a luxury product. About 9 in 10 flights from the UK are for leisure travel. These aren't survival emissions. It's something which is incredibly unequally distributed, both within the UK and globally, in terms of who gets the benefit from the flight and who is already suffering from the impacts of the climate crisis. In the UK, as you can see from this graphic, around 70% of flights are taken up by just 15% of the population. And around half of people don't fly at all in any given year. So there's huge issues around equality. So aviation is difficult to decarbonise. In other areas, alternatives to using fossil fuels are ready to go, and they're often actually cheaper, like using renewable energy. there isn't an alternative to fossil fuel powered planes available, particularly for long haul flights, which need to carry a lot of people. But what we do have is some incredibly optimistic projections by the aviation industry about how these technologies could develop in the future. And that comes along with a reliance on false solutions, which could cause as much climate harms as the solution that they're trying to fix, such as offsetting. And the industry attempts to use the prospect of technologies which don't exist yet, like electric planes, to avoid implementing the only solution which would work for tackling aviation emissions now, which is demand reduction. And this is something which Heathrow does to try to justify its expansion. So this shows Heathrow's projections for how it plans to tackle its emissions. And huge chunks of this are things like future aircraft. Well, that basically means imaginary aircraft. They've drawn a picture of it and it looks very nice, but it's not something they can actually roll out onto the runway and use as a form of low carbon transport. And there's also a chunk called MBMs, and what that stands for is market-based emissions. And what that means is that they're going to pay somebody else to cut their emissions instead. So this comes back to what David was saying. It's the idea that certain people who are wealthy enough can continue burning fossil fuels, and they'll pay other people, usually poorer people in the global south, to cut their emissions instead. That's clearly not a just or effective approach to tackling climate change. So I'm going to quickly whiz through some of the proposed solutions which aren't going to cut it. So offsetting, the main issue is that planting trees is just not equivalent to leaving fossil fuels in the ground. Trees take decades, if not centuries, to grow. And during that time, the emissions from flying are still in the atmosphere. They're contributing to warming, and they're contributing to effects of that warming which are not reversible, even if the trees suck up the carbon as planned, like melting ice caps. There's also the issue that forests can be burned down or cut down, especially in a warmer world. Biofuels, there's a limited supply of agricultural land, and if you want to use huge amounts of plants to create jet fuel, then that's going to bring serious risks of pushing up food prices, increasing hunger, and it's also very likely to increase deforestation, which would itself have huge climate impact. So synthetic fuels, it's technically possible to create jet fuel from carbon dioxide captured from the air. No one's ever done it as more than a tiny, tiny prototype, and the energy required to do this is enormous. If the current demand for flying was to be powered by synthetic fuels, we would need more electricity than the world's current renewables capacity in order to supply this. I mean, clearly not realistic. Negative emissions, that's kind of a similar concept in which planes would keep on flying, but the carbon they emit would be captured from the air and stored. Again, technically possible, huge demand for electricity, never been generated at scale, raises a lot of issues around permanency of the storage, and also fails to do anything about the warming from the other greenhouse gases emitted by planes, not just the carbon dioxide. Small electric planes are in development, but there are serious issues around battery weight, which is going to make long haul flights very difficult. And there's also the time it would take to develop them and safety test them and roll them out, which would be decades. There just isn't time to wait 30 or 40 or 50 years before tackling aviation emissions.
That's 2 minutes, Ali.
2 minutes, okay. Hydrogen planes have some similar problems in terms of the technology just not being developed and having some issues around the volume that it takes to store hydrogen. So the framing of net zero is part of the problem with these false solutions. It makes it seem okay to keep burning fossil fuels because there will be a way to remove the emissions. But this concept is being used today by fossil fuel companies to justify keeping on burning fossil fuels. So if the technical solutions don't work, where do we go? flying less works to reduce emissions. A progressive tax on flying, such as a frequent flyer levy or a tax on air miles, this would help to reduce the frequent flying, which makes up the majority of flights. So this kind of tax would go up per flight that someone takes in a given time period, or per the distance that they fly. And so it would progressively penalise those who are flying the most. And this is necessary in order to ensure that emissions are cut in a way that's fair to everyone. And this is something that has to be applied across policies to tackle climate change. It needs to be fair. The people who are polluting the most need to make the biggest cuts. So finally, why now? At the moment, aviation is going through an unprecedented crisis due to COVID. Why is now the time to bring in a tax on frequent flying? Well, this moment is potentially an opportunity to think about what a transport system that works for people and the planet would look like, rather than just going back to business as usual and dangerous levels of pollution. We need measures put in place now to limit flying. And in order to do that, we need to challenge the greenwashing narrative which the aviation industry is pushing out, which relies on solutions which don't work or don't exist.
Thank you so much, Ali. And thank you to all of our speakers. I think I probably speak for everyone when I say our brains are full, but in a good way. So yeah, I'm saying some claps. Thank you so much. Again, time is not in our favour. So I'm going to pass straight over to Sally and Mark from Biofuel Watch and UK Youth Climate Coalition, who are going to read out some of the questions that we had in the chat. Some of the many questions. So thank you so much, everyone who sent questions in. And so we'll dive straight into a Q&A, but reminder, keep asking questions. We're going to try and address them even afterwards if we can't do it now. So I'll pass over to Sally and Mark.
Hiya. Yeah, so many questions. Not enough time, unfortunately, but we'll be able to get through to hopefully all of them by passing them on to all the speakers afterwards. I'm going to go through some questions for each individual speaker first, and hopefully if you can keep your answers to just a couple minutes, just for time. So firstly to Naomi, could you, in any kind of small amount of time, which is difficult, elaborate a little bit more on hydrogen as a Trojan horse, and or anything about CCS or any resources you can point people to, because there was quite a bit of chat about that. And there was also a specific question about the situation of free LNG terminals in Germany and what the situation around them is. So over to you, Naomi, and remember everybody, we will definitely pass on all the other questions. Sorry we didn't have time for all of them.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in hydrogen, but I'll do my best and point you towards good resources. As far as I understand, hydrogen energy is quite easy to store. Easier right now, apparently, than renewables would be. And so this is how it's sold. And there's many different ways of creating hydrogen energy. Right now, the most feasible is using fossil fuels. So hydrogen energy that's created right now is with the chemical process using oil or coal to make it. But hypothetically, in the future, more of it would be made using renewable energy. And you see, so right now it's being used as a Trojan horse. A company will want to build a big pipeline and say, oh, but in the future it'll be used for hydrogen. But there'll be massive gas reserves in the region that companies are moving towards exploiting and exploring those gas reserves. So we can see with the fraction of investments and work going into producing actual hydrogen from renewable energy and going into renewables in general is minuscule compared to how much is going into the fossil infrastructure. And the amount they talk about how the hydrogen can be green hydrogen and used and made from renewables is huge compared to how much they're talking about the hydrogen energy that will be made from fossil fuels. So yeah, there's potential in some way for it to be renewable, but how it's being used and the intentions of the industry are to use it as a Trojan horse to exploit more fossil fuels and build more fossil fuel infrastructure. And Corporate Europe Observatory and Food and Water Watch Europe have great resources on hydrogen. And it's a similar situation with CCS, where this technology, this half-baked technology that, we'll just store all these emissions underground, usually in old fracking wells, as if it's possible to make the ground everywhere completely airtight, so that methane will never escape. And methane is odorless, it doesn't look like anything, so it just conveniently, they don't regulate much in general in supply chains, gas supply chains, and don't measure much. Yeah, and the same organizations I mentioned before have great resources on this. And then the 3 LNG terminals in Germany, it's absolutely crazy. There's the US offering a lot of money for them to help Germany with it. There's a plan to, the US are pushing for these terminals, have done a huge amount of lobbying for it. Trump wants to send gas from the east coast of the US to Europe via Germany, and Germany's massively crumpling to this pressure. It's wild to build 3 massive terminals in the same stretch of coastline in the same time frame. And more groups are active against it. And if anyone wants to find out more, be in touch with these groups, feel free to email me.
Great, thanks Naomi. I'll just pass to Sally for a question for David.
Thank you so much. So we've got a couple of great questions for David in the chat box. One is from Jill. What is the best energy source or energy mix for Uganda? None of the energy options are eco, wildlife, or even people friendly. And David, how can campaigners from Europe and other parts of the world support campaigners in Uganda to get the maximum impact?
I think you're on mute, David, still. Maybe just because of time, we'll just move on to questions for Ian just quickly and then move back to David after that. So again, absolute load of questions in around Ian's presentation, which is really good. Oh, I can hear myself and now I can't again. Good. So just again, in as small a possible time as you can, Ian, and I'm sorry. But could you give a bit of kind of a further explanation into some of the reasons why people suggest the nuclear is a low carbon power source so around, and why it could be helpful for baseload power? Because these are questions that we've been getting you through a bit, and maybe particularly if you have time, just point to some resources on this, because we might not have time to go through all of these. And then the main question is it worth retiring the current fleet, is another question we got through. So yes, don't build any more nuclear, but should we be retiring the existing fleet in certain places as well?
Hello? Oh dear, appear to have... Hello?
We can hear you, Ian.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, oh right, it was all back now. I think I've got the wonderful power of Windows XP on a 20-year-old laptop. It's wondering anything's working at all. So why is nuclear power not low CO2? I mean, to be honest, it's lower than gas and coal, if you like, at the moment, but there is still a fairly substantial CO2 footprint, which hasn't really been quantified, to be honest. I mean, you've got to mine the uranium, you've got to bring it here, either enriched or uranium yellow cake. Nobody has really quantified the CO2 footprint of nuclear waste storage and packaging or whatever. There's emissions from things like the solvents used for enriching uranium, uranium hexafluoride and the like, that can all escape. There's lots of CFCs potentially can escape, and they're potent greenhouse gases. The uranium ores are declining in quality. We've basically taken all the really good stuff, so the lower an ore grade, the more energy you have to put into extracting the uranium from it. So at some point, you're going to get to the point where you're actually putting more energy into extracting the uranium than you get from fissioning it. I'm not saying we're at that point yet, but the CO2 footprint of extracting uranium is going to go up. I think it's around about 10 to 20 parts per million at the moment for ore grade is the level at which it takes more energy to get the uranium out than you get from fissioning it. We're not quite near that yet, but some people are talking about getting uranium from seawater. Yes, there is uranium in seawater, but it's in there at about, I don't know, hundredths or thousandths of a part per million. So it's clearly not energetically viable to get uranium out of seawater. I don't think we need to bother about retiring the fleet. I think we're going to be nuclear fleet. I think we're going to basically be forced into it. They're coming to the end of their natural lives. Most of them. We've just had an extension on the Hunterston reactor. It's got a graphite core, and that's got a series of cracks in it, which for most rational people would make you think maybe it's come to the end of its natural life. But the Office of the Nuclear Regulator extended its life again. Regardless of whether it's safe or not, it's clearly in the end game now. It's sort of drinking in the last chance saloon, and a lot of the other reactors are basically well past pensionable age. I mean, the problem with nuclear power is not that we're killing nuclear power off; it's just coming to the end of its life, if you like. The reactors are aging and will need to be shut down in the not too distant future, and nobody's willing to invest in new ones without massive government support. I mean, it's always been the case that nuclear power plants have needed basically government insurance by default, because you can't get insurance cover for a nuclear power station that covers all the liabilities. That's basically open-ended. But now companies are expecting, large amounts of government support. We've got I don't know what Hinkley Point C was it with their contract for difference. It was something like £96 per kilowatt hour they were charging, which is well over. I think wind power is down to about £40 a kilowatt hour now, and that's sort of fixed in. They're going to be charging that for years into the future. So it's just not economically viable, regardless of any supposed green credentials, which can all be, as far as I'm concerned, at least be shot down in flames. Does that answer most of it, or have I just gone off at a tangent?
No, that was brilliant and succinct, and thank you so much for that.
Crikey, that makes a change for me.
Let's try David again. Sally, did you want to just ask the question again?
Thank you. I'm so sorry, David. There have been fantastic questions coming in for you, and we've only got time just for one at the moment. But can you tell us how campaigners around the world can support campaigns in Uganda, like the Bugoma Forest campaign?
Am I on mute again? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. And you asked a very good question. We have oftentimes been helped by campaigners in the north. We have worked with Friends of the Earth International. We have worked with Global Forest Coalition. We have worked with many of them, including those that actually have never been even here. So the only way you people can help us is, one, to look at the financials back home, because most of these companies that come to destroy forests here are from the north, or they use pensioners' money from the north. They're not from Africa. So that is one way you can help us. But also we can do some kind of, at global level, for you, there is a way African countries can be influenced, because some of our funding and some of the money we use at the country comes from some of those countries. If we can be helped that way, that would be the best way to go. Funders level, but also engaging African leaders when they come for those very important meetings, which they come for, just append their signatures and come back home and do business as usual. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was a great answer. And we also have lots of amazing questions for Ali. Ali, I'll put one in the chat box. Do you think that taxing frequent flyers would be effective? This person is worried that affluent people and business people from large companies might just be prepared to pay the costs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is going to depend in part on what level a frequent flyer tax is set at and how kind of quickly the steps escalate. And I think it is the case that that wouldn't work as a measure in isolation. So you would want a frequent flyer levy to be brought in as one of the measures to tackle overall levels of aviation. But there's a lot of other issues around the tax structure for aviation. For example, at the moment, you don't pay tax on jet fuel, and you also don't pay VAT on a flight. So flights would be zero rated for VAT, but if you were to buy, for example, a new bike, you're paying 20% VAT on that bike. That's clearly ridiculous. So I think the whole, aviation has a history of lobbying very successfully for generous tax breaks. And yeah, obviously there's other issues as well around, for example, at the moment it's more expensive to take a train rather than a plane. Again, clearly not effective if you want to encourage people to make low carbon travel choices.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ali. And yeah, we'll just end with a question for everybody, which was brilliantly asked by Naomi. Thanks. So we're going to just go around all the speakers on this one, and if you can keep your kind of responses to a couple minutes, and yeah, so we can wrap up just about on time. So the question is, I fear that in Europe we tend to campaign in silos, with different campaign areas usually isolated from each other. How can we better connect the fights against various false solutions, and how can we better tell a story that encompasses a holistic view? So maybe let's start with Ian on this one, and then we'll pass to the others as we go along. You're on mute, Ian.
Sorry, I was just reading the chat. What was the question again? Sorry, I've drifted off. What was it? What was the question again? Sorry. Hello.
Hi. Sorry. The question was just how can we start connecting the fights against various false solutions together so that we stop in campaigning in silos, and how can we tell a story that encompasses a holistic view around all of these false solutions?
Oh, there's a question. Do we do it all under the same umbrella? I think publicity is the key. I think if we can identify these sort of false solutions, and to be fair, I think the public are getting on board. I think with the flights particularly, I mean, it's not quite like smoking yet, but it's becoming, people look at you a bit askance. If you're going to Australia, on a regular basis, which a couple of my friends are, people have started asking questions. I think it's entering the public consciousness. I think that's the umbrella we can put it all under. We get a lot more questioning about nuclear power now. My favourite hobby horse. A lot more people. I've been on XR groups and people have asked about nuclear power, and we've had some interesting discussions. And people are sort of starting to see through the fog of misinformation, if you like. I mean, with something like flights, if you look at a jet aircraft and then someone's trying to tell you it can be made CO2 neutral, most people are going to sort of look at it a bit askance and think, really, whether that stops them or not. I think, a lot of the problems we've talked about are things people don't like anyway. They don't like planes flying over them. They don't like burning waste. They're a bit suspicious about nuclear power. So I think the umbrella we need to get it onto is just public acceptance or public non-acceptance, if you like, moving them into the socially unacceptable category. I think we all just carry on pushing in the same direction, I think, and try not to contradict each other, which we don't as a rule. But I mean, I think the nuclear power thing, there's a bit of a movement in some environmental circles that nuclear is a good idea. I mean, there's like George Monbiot, and he's looked at it, and you can see the point he's making. He makes a rational point, but I think he maybe needs to look at in a slightly different way. I think the public are sort of gathering everything together. I think gradually pulling everything together themselves. I'm quite optimistic in that point of view. We never used to talk about this when I was the age of a lot of the people here. The environment was just something, you rode your motorbike through, or you went fishing, or you climbed a tree in. But now it's become something that is seen to affect our lives in a very direct fashion. And I think that's very helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. Sorry, I'm just going to round up as well, but that's also, again, and it's cruel of me to ask people questions that are so complex in like 30 seconds. But again, I'm going to quickly pass to Naomi. I know it's your own question, but you might have some thoughts on it yourself. I wonder if you do. Yeah, the question's in the chat box at the bottom of it as well. Well, you know what it is because you asked it, actually.
Yeah, I asked because I'm not sure. I really have this fear that, you know, we're doing work on gas and then maybe we'll win, and then there's going to be just other things. Sometimes I wonder, should we just do a massive, if everyone fighting false solutions or fossil fuel industry was working on making renewables happen in the just community-led way that is not an extractivist model. Yeah, I wonder if that as a focus would, if shifting our priority like that could be better. I'm not sure. But I think events like this, coming together like this, is the first time I see a webinar linking up different full solutions. So at least starting these conversations and understanding is a great step.
That's great. Yeah, I think hopefully it's a good first start. And Ailey will mention about an action that people can take as well after this that hopefully links a lot of these things together. David, do you have any thoughts on this question? Any quick thoughts? So just about how that we can campaign around false solutions together and unite these different issues that we're campaigning on, and tell a story that encompasses a better view. Again, in a short amount of time, sorry.
Thank you very much. I think, like my previous speakers have said, first of all, we need to make a lot of publication, like publicity, I mean. We need to make a lot of publicity. We need to make publications out of this. We need to make powerful messages and flag them out. And also, I think we need such kind of talks. They are very important. And when it comes to, because we're facing climate change at different levels and we are losing resources at different times. So I think people in the north, especially now campaigners like I was asked, should a little bit give us support to ensure that now the remaining few resources already where they are portraying it to be some kind of climate solution, then we denounce it. Let's denounce them strongly, but also let's see how best we can empower some people that have lost their resources just because, I'm talking from the African perspective, where corporation comes and gives resources to some other people to start planting pine in return to benefit from carbon benefits. I think we need to do some bit of economic empowerment, some of these people, so that they resist such kind of cheap talk and keep their natural kind of environment. So I think we need to keep these kinds of debates. We need to make strong publications, but we also need to make engagements at a national level dialogues and engage the media at all levels.
That's great. Thanks so much, David, and thanks everyone for the short response as well. Alethea, you drew the short straw of being last and us being late. So perhaps if you could answer any thoughts you have in maybe even just a sentence or two. And I'm sorry for that.
No, that's totally fine. I guess something for me is a common theme of challenging the whole concept of net zero and being like, actually, we need to get to as close to zero carbon as possible. We don't want net zero. We want to stop burning fossil fuels. And that is the most important thing. And anything that is a distraction from that is unhelpful at this point.
Thank you all so much. I know that was very fast and we wanted to hear so much more. But as all of you have alluded to, hopefully this is just the beginning of many more conversations like this. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who attended tonight and to all our amazing speakers. It's really been super useful and my brain is doing lots of connecting the dots, which is a good thing, I hope. But it does not end there. I'm just going to take 1 minute of your time to say that starting tomorrow, the Net Zero Festival will begin, and despite proposing some genuine climate solutions, there will be a whole host of false solutions, some of which we mentioned this evening, and we would really love your help. So after this webinar closes, we will be sending out a social media pack that you can use to take action online to call out those false solutions and start that narrative, start that conversation, make sure that we do not allow governments to be led astray. So watch out for that coming into your inboxes, and please, any support you can offer would be amazing. And as we said, we are going to try and look through the chat, which was very active, and answer some of the questions that you had that weren't addressed in real time, and send some follow-up resources as well, because we're super excited that this is just the beginning of a lot of learning to do, myself included. So yeah, this is not the end, but thank you so much for joining us this evening. I won't take up any more of your time, as we've already gone over, but the recording of this webinar will be available online as well. So if you want to watch it all again, you can. Thank you so much for being here and giving us your Tuesday evening. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.